Okay, welcome back. In this video, we're going to create the folder structure we need for implementing Redux in our application. And we're also going to start by creating our index.js file and do all the imports that we need to do to implement and wrap our application with Redux. So let's start off by creating the folders we need for the application. And we're going to use a pattern for this one, where we divide our components into container components and presentational components. I actually did like a light version of this in my previous course, where we created the app that we're using now. I didn't fully implement it because my thought was that it may be better to not do that in the course where we just wanted to learn the basics of React. So we're going to convert the home and the movie components into one home container, one movie container, and one presentational container for each of them. So we can start off by creating the different folders that we need now. And I'm going to show you all of this when we get there. So first of all, we create 3 different folders in our SRC, in our source folder. So create a new folder that's called Actions. We also need to create a folder that's called Reducers. And we create a new folder that's called Containers. And as you guessed, we put our action files in the actions, we put our reducers in the reducers folder, and containers into the containers folder. So yeah, you probably guessed that already. And we can actually also create the empty files in these ones for now, so we know what files we are going to create. So into our actions folder, we create a new file called index.js. We talk more about this later. Into our containers folder, we create a new file that's called home container.js. We also create a file that's called movie container.js. And into our reducers folder, we create 3 files. We create one that's called index.js, and we also create a file that's called home_reducer.js, and the last one is a new file called movie_reducer.js. We're also going to talk about this more later and how we combine this into the index.js file. But first, we'll check out the index.js file for the whole applications, where we're going to do the different imports we need for applying Redux to this app. So let's start off by importing some Redux stuff here. We can actually write Redux stuff so we know that's the ones we're importing. So start off by import. We're going to need something that's called a provider from React-Redux. And this is the ones that we installed earlier in the first video we're using now. Import, we need something that's called create store, and we need something that's called apply middleware. And these ones we're grabbing from Redux. So these ones are from the original Redux, and the provider is just from the official bindings that's called React-Redux for use with React. And we also need to import our Redux promise middleware that I talked about in the first video also. So we import promise middleware from Redux promise, like so. And we also need to import our reducers. So we import reducers from /reducers, like so. And that's all we need to import. And now we have to implement this to get Redux into our application. So the first thing we have to do is to apply our middleware Redux promise to our store. Firstly, why do we need this middleware? Well, we're going to use an API for fetching the data from the movie database. And when we're fetching data like this, we're using a promise. So we don't know exactly when in time we're going to receive all the movie info. So if we're not using the Redux promise middleware, the action will dispatch immediately before we have received the actual data with the movies, and that's not good. So we need to have this middleware because it will make the action to wait until we have received the data and then dispatch the action. So if we read a little bit more about middleware on the Redux site, we can see what is a middleware. Well, it provides a third-party extension point between dispatching an action and the moment it reaches the reducer. So this is exactly what we're doing here. We're putting our middleware just in between before the action reaches the reducers. This middleware will tell the action to wait until the promise has been resolved before it dispatches the action to the reducers. And this is exactly what we need here, because otherwise it won't work. We won't get the data into our state. So if you want to know more about the middleware, I suggest you read more about it on the Redux site. And there's also a lot of articles and things like this on the internet about the middleware. So just Google it. So we start by applying the middleware. So we create a new const and call it store with middleware, like so. And then we use apply middleware. That's the one we imported here. And as a parameter, we're sending in our promise middleware. And that's the one here. And this one will return a function that we're going to directly invoke to create a store. So we can write it like this. And we send in our create store. And I know this looks kind of strange for many people. It actually did that to me also in the beginning. But what this one will do for us, it return a function. It's called a higher order function. A higher order function is a function that either can take a function as a parameter or will return a new function for us. So this one, actually, I can show you here. It's the same as writing, what should we call this, with middleware, maybe like so. And we apply middleware and send in our promise middleware, like so. And then we create a new const and call it store with middleware, like so. Whoops, like this. And we use this one with middleware and we send in our create store. So these two lines are exactly the same as this. So think about it as this one, we get a function and we immediately invoke this function with the create store as a parameter. So that's why it looked like this. But you could write it as this if you want. It's exactly the same. But it's nice to have this shorthand here. And I also suggest to read more about the higher order function because they're very useful. And once you get the hang of it, it actually looks quite nice like this. So we have our store created with the middleware applied. And now we have to wrap our application with the provider so the application can access the Redux store. And the provider components only use is to provide the child components with the store. That's the only thing that it will do. So we can wrap our app component with the provider and our app will have access to the store. So we write provider and provider takes a prop that's called store where we supply the store that we created. So we call that store with middleware, and this store with middleware need to know what reducers it should use, and we send in our reducers. So this is necessary to get the store to work. Then we can move our app inside the provider like this. And we can make it look a little bit nicer, maybe like so. Yeah, looking good. And this is all that we have to do in the index.js file. We have hooked up our application with Redux. The provider will make sure that the app can access the store for us. And we created the store, applied the middleware, and everything is hooked up correctly. So if we save the file, and you'll notice that the app won't function now. And that's because we haven't created some reducers yet. So we have to do this one also before it will work. And as you can see in the reducers folder, we have 3 files, and that's because we're going to divide our reducers into multiple files. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I wanted to show you this as it's useful if you have quite a large application and you want to have some structure in it. Because the Redux state is only one object or one, whatever, you can actually have one array if you want, but we're using an object here, and it would be nice to have some structure in this state object. So what we can do here is we're going to create reducers for the home in one separate file, and we're going to create reducers for the movie in its own file. And we can combine these in the index.js. And as you see here also, when we import something here, we import the reducers from the reducers directory. We don't have to write index.js. It will know this by default. So if you have the index.js file in this folder, you don't have to write it. It will know that it is the index.js file. It will grab there. But if we go into our index.js file in the reducers folders, and we can write some short code here just to make it work. So we import something that's called combine reducers. And yeah, it's exactly what it does. It's self-explanatory, so I don't have to explain this one. We combine the reducers. We're going to combine the reducers into one, and we import this one from Redux. We also need to import our home reducer, and we do that. We call that home. You can call it whatever you want here, but we import it from /home. Of course, we have to have like this here also, and we have a // and home reducer. And we also import our movie reducer that we call movie, like so. So now we can combine our reducers. So we create a new const that's called root reducer. You can call it whatever you want, but this is kind of like standard to call it a root reducer. And then we use our combine reducers like this, and we just have to write home because that's what we call our home reducer. And we make a comma, and we write movie because that's what we call a movie reducer. And then we have to export default root reducer like so. So as you can see, this is just an object, a JavaScript object here that we're sending into the combine reducers, and we export it as a root reducer. So if we save this one now, our application will work again. We haven't done anything yet. We haven't created any actions. So it's still using its internal state. So it's not using Redux state yet, but we have hooked up our application for using Redux. So this is it for this video. See you in the next one.